الشائعة نشوفها أحيانا أثناء السيرفي، يكون حاطط الليبل على غرفة الغازات الطبية هي مواد قابلة للاشتعال، وهي مواد مؤكسدة وليست قابلة للاشتعال. corrosive المواد الحارقة. So what is an example of corrosive materials that we have in a hospital? Of course, acids and alkalines. So anything with the pH, when the pH is very high or the pH is very low, it is considered as corrosive. Hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, and other. So there are many acids that we have that are corrosive. Sodium hydroxide, it is alkaline. It's something that has very high pH. So high pH is alkalines, low pH is acid. The water is a 7, pH is 7, that's a neutral. Then we have the toxic chemicals. Toxic, that means poisonous, not SAMA. So what is the definition of a toxic? We can say that if it can cause illness or death to human or living tissue. Do you think that it's a clear definition? Any substance that can cause harm or injuries or death to living tissue or living being, whether it's animals or others? No, we can't say. There was a tournament in India who can drink more Pepsi, and one guy drank 2 bottles of these, the large bottle, 2-liter Pepsi, and he died on the spot immediately. So can we say that Pepsi is toxic because one person, when he drank Pepsi, he died? No. Water, if you drink way too much water, your cells will drown and people can die. So we can't say water is toxic. So that definition was missing one word, which is we're talking about the small quantities, like cyanide and other. So it is a small, any hazardous substance or any substance taken in a small quantity that can cause injuries, illness, or death, then that is a toxic. So it has to do with the quantity and the toxicity. فالمواد السامة تعريفا يميز كمية صغيرة من المواد السامة لو أخذتها أو شخص أخذها ممكن تسبب إصابة أو مرض أو وفاة. كنا تكلمنا على قبل قليل في مسابقة حصلت في الهند إنه مين يشرب بيبسي كمية كبيرة. شخص شرب علبتين كبار 2 لتر وتوفى immediately. أصبح في ثاني أكسيد الكربون في الدم نسبة عالية جدا وتوفى. فما نقول على البيبسي إنه مادة سامة. Explosive. قلنا في عندنا unstable chemicals, they can change into explosives, and many of them. So we have, as mentioned, picric acid, or sometimes you have the explosives. You have sodium. Sodium chloride is just a regular item, but sodium by itself is a highly reactive, and it can change into explosive. And we'll see that in reactivity. So the reactivity, then the next one is reactive. reactive is تفاعل مع الأكسجين أو مع المياه مثل الصوديوم مثلا المعدن المادة highly reactive with water. If you put a small amount of sodium in water, it will explode. Potassium, if I put a small amount of potassium in water, it will ignite. حيتحول إلى حريق، إلى مادة قابلة للاشتعال. And so on. The silver nitrate, it exposed to the sunlight too long, it will change into explosives. White phosphorus, it will react with the oxygen in the air and can explode. So it needs a special requirement to deal with it. It has to be an area with low oxygen presence. So chemicals, there is a very wide range. We can talk for days about these properties of chemicals. So as you mentioned, corrosives and caustics. So corrosives, when you have the any chemical with a very low pH or with a very high pH, either it's a basic or alkaline and acid, they are considered as corrosive. So hydrochloric acid is that's 1 mole, that's a 0, that is extremely corrosive. That means when we talk about corrosive, it means it will corrode metal and it will kill living tissue. So if it spills on someone's skin, it will immediately dissolve the skin. It can burn the skin down all the way down to the bones. So this is extremely important to have proper protection when you're dealing with the corrosives. The gloves that we deal with, and regular gloves, surgical gloves that we have at the hospital, they can last the xylene or acids for maybe a few seconds, 10 seconds or so. So you need to make sure that you have the right type of PPEs. You need acid gloves or nitrile gloves. It can last for up to 10 minutes usually with acids or with xylene. So it's very important to make sure that you do have the right type of gloves or right type of PPEs when you're dealing with these corrosives. I witnessed an incident also. Somebody bought a sulfuric acid, 100 Kibrit, for his farm. He went to clean the driveway, and he had leftover. He left it in a bottle, in a Pepsi bottle. Unfortunately, his son, 9 years old, came and found the bottle a long time after, and he spilled something. It spilled on his thigh and his leg. I was at the National Guard at that time, and of course, the father was smart, so he dipped him in the pool and he took him to the hospital immediately. By the time they called me, I was about 15 minutes away from the hospital. So by the time I arrived, of course, we told them to just wash. But the fire department was there and told them they read in the safety data sheet that do not add water to acid. So the doctors were confused and the nurses were confused. So they did not add water. They did not wash it with water. So they used saline, trying to wash a little bit of the leftover of that chemical in his thigh and his stomach. And that leftover, even though he's been dipped in water already, it burned the tables. That table that was underneath, when they wash it with saline, it burned that table. So we had to discard that table. And the kid has second-degree burns. Unfortunately, if they added water immediately, if they flushed it with enough water, he would have been fine. But just the confusion, and it says do not add water, and what they meant there, you never add water to acid. You always add acid to water. So this is extremely important to understand. So we never make it as a rule of thumb, no matter what chemicals. Always, when you need to make dilution, for example, I have absolute sulfuric acid, 98% or 99%. I need to make 10%. So I need to fill 90% or 90 ml of water. Then I'll add 10 ml of acid to it. So never add water to acid. Don't start with the acid, then add the water to it. Make it as a rule of thumb. Always start with water, put your water in a container, then add the acid to it. So and that's what they meant by this in the safety data sheet. So they did not wash, delayed washing that exposed area and led to second degree burn. Otherwise, it would have been he would have been much better. So always make it again as a rule of thumb. Whenever you have exposure to any chemicals, no matter what it is, always the first thing to do if you get exposed to it, splash in your face, in your eyes, in your skin, wash it in water for a longer period of time, at least minimum for 15 minutes. Why do you need to wash it that long? So if I rinse it for like 2 minutes, that is enough to wash that chemical off the skin, right? Not at all times. Chemicals are not like bacteria or viruses. It will penetrate through your skin until it gets down. So you need to wash it long enough to make sure that whatever is been absorbed by the skin to be diluted to a very, very low concentration that will have no effect on us. An example, I'll give you another example. Hydrofluoric acid, not hydrochloric with an F, hydrofluoric acid. If it spills in your hand, nothing will happen. You don't feel any pain at the time. So some people will ignore it. Say, it did not hurt, so it means it's harmful. And they will ignore it. 24 hours later, the pain will start because it will be absorbed through your skin, into your bloodstream, or into the bones, and it will start to dissolve the calcium in your bones. And by then, the damage is done. You cannot even reverse it. بعض الأحماض is always referred to safety data sheet. Whenever you have an exposure, and no matter what it is, any substance, whether you know or you don't know, wash it with water for a long period of time, at least 15 minutes in running water. Of course, not very cold water, not warm water, so just a warm temperature, room temperature water. I hope that is clear. Okay, to comply with the regulations, so whether it's a Joint Commission, whether it's SIBAHI, whether it's the Ministry of Health, whether it's any regulatory, the OSHA or anyone, so you need to make sure they all mandate you to have a hazardous material ban. So having a written document Sometimes they ask for a plan, sometimes they ask for policy and procedure. It depends. So Sibahi always asks for a plan. Joint Commission, they ask for a plan. What is the difference between a plan and the policy and procedure? The plan, it would be could be similar to a policy and procedure, but I will have uh, goals and objectives because you need to update. So the idea for having a plan that you select KPIs, two KPIs, and you need to update it annually. Set a goal and try to see can you achieve it. For example, I need to set a goal to train all my staff. This is a KPI. All staff in the hospital who deal with hazardous material, they need to be trained at least once a year. So this is a goal, try to achieve. If I achieve that goal, then I try to select next year a different goal. Trying to see maybe try to reduce the hazardous waste, for example, by 10% or by 20%. So every year you need to change the policy and procedure, could be up to 3 years. Plan has to be updated every year because you need to set a goal and you need to make sure that if you meet the goal, then you need to set another goal. And same thing for waste management plan. So they could be in one plan, hazardous material and waste management. As we mentioned, they are almost the same, but there are some differences. So you can include them into one plan, that's fine, or you can have them two separate, that's also fine. So whichever way you like it, it is fine. قلنا الجوينت كوميشن والسباحي ووزاره الصحه وكله يطلب من كل منشاه لازم يكون في بلان، لازم يكون عندي سياسه للتعامل مع المواد الخطره ومكتوبه وموضحه ويكون في تدريب للموظفين. According to Joint Commission and Sibahi, we have two types. So in your plan, you need to have it's set to the two parts: training on the handling, transporting, dealing with the hazardous material, and signs and symptoms. You have to train the staff on signs and symptoms. This is the most finding. Almost 80% of the hospitals that we visit, they lack this part. They misunderstand this part. They think we're talking about signages. Well, it's talking about signs and symptoms. الأعراض. لو شخص تعرض إلى مواد خطرة إيش هي الأعراض ممكن تظهر وكيف ممكن نتعامل معها. So what kind of signs or symptoms that we have if they are exposed, if one person is exposed to hazardous materials? So the first thing that's some chemical, depends of course on the chemical. So if you're dealing with the xylene or formalin, they have very strong smell that you cannot even stay in that area, that room, because your eyes will be teary, your sore throat, you have a sore throat, you start coughing, you run your nose. So these are signs that symptoms, and you start coughing because of the exposure to formaldehyde, because it has a very strong smell. But what if you have chemical that does not have a smell? Like in the lab also, they have in microbiology, they have the carbon dioxide incubator, CO2. And that to grow bacteria, because bacteria likes CO2, so it needs CO2 to survive. Some bacteria, so they do have CO2 incubator. If there's a leak in that CO2, the area is small, it's a very small room and no ventilation. So what happens with the CO2? Is it a toxic gas? No, it is not. But it will displace oxygen. It will reduce the level of oxygen in the room. So if you have a leak of carbon dioxide or the nitrogen, or the inert gases, they reduce the level of oxygen. So instead of having 21% oxygen in the room, it could drop to 19, or it could drop even lower to 16. That becomes risky. People start to fall asleep, and if no one noticed that, or they did not realize it, they will become unconscious and they can die, asphyxiated. They lack of oxygen. On the other hand, the carbon monoxide is very toxic. Even in very small quantities, it can attach to your blood cells, and it will prevent the blood cells from transporting oxygen to your brain and your heart. So that's why people will die. But carbon dioxide has to have a large quantities. The allowed quantities of CO2 is 5,000 parts per million. The allowed for CO, carbon monoxide, is only 5 parts per million. And you see that when you're mandated to do the medical gas or medical air analysis, when you do the purity and humidity, if you pay attention to that, see what is the acceptable quantities in the medical air, you will see 500 parts should be less than 500 parts of CO2 and less than 5 parts per million of CO. Then, of course, we have the labeling. It has to include how to label the chemicals, what system to use. Are you going to use the NFPA 704, or you're going to use the globally harmonized system, the GHS, or you're going to use the OSHA, whichever one. The kingdom now is towards with the Saudi OSHA in hopefully taking place soon. They're working on that, so they will follow the GHS, the globally harmonized system. But a lot of hospitals we go, they use the NFPA. The NFPA is very nice. I like it myself, but it has a problem that sometimes you cannot find these numbers. So we'll talk about that in a minute. You cannot find the numbers that you need, even if you refer to say data sheets, you refer to the internet, and you find different numbers. So for reactivity, for example, you find different numbers in different areas. So having difficulty trying to find the accurate numbers. Otherwise, it's a great system, and it's very easy to tell you a lot of hazards without having to read much. And we will talk about that in a few minutes. Storing, how to store chemicals, where to store them, how to store them, and safe handling, transporting. So storing, where do we store chemicals? This is another common mistake, another finding we have in most hospitals. A lot of hospitals, they do have the flammable cabinets, the yellow cabinet that you see it, and that's great. But when we open it, you find it's full of corrosives or full of regular supplies. So they don't store flammables in it. And this comes with the double layers. It has insulation, and it's, God forbid, if a fire happens outside, so it will not cause these liquids, or it will prevent the heat from going inside for quite a long time. Or the opposite, if fire happens inside, it will prevent the heat from going outside for a long time. And it has good ventilation that you can have proper connected to a ventilation exhaust system. So they're great to have, but you need to make sure that we use them the right way. And you see the hand gel sanitizers, which is, it has 70% alcohol, which is highly flammable, or it's a flammable, and you see it stored on the shelf. While you have a flammable cabinets empty or has non-flammable materials. And again, you have corrosive cabinets. Corrosive cabinet does not have to be ventilated. It does not have to be a double layer, so it could be any cabinet. You can make it out of wood. That's fine. You can make it out of plastic. That's fine. You can put their any activated charcoal. It would be enough to absorb that smell. So you don't need to have proper ventilation for it, or good ventilation. In the shelf, you have to store, if you have not large quantities of corrosives, it is fine to store it on a shelf, but make sure that you put a secondary containment underneath. But flammable, if you have large quantities, it has to be by law, by OSHA, there has to be in a flammable cabinet. Civil defense mandate to have it in a flammable cabinet. And same thing with Sibahi Joint Commission. But if you have in the small quantities, then it is fine. And there's a formula. It was the OSHA before they had, if you have up to 1 gallon per 100 square feet room. So if your room area is 100 square feet, which is 11 square meters, you can put up to 1 gallon or 3.75 liters of total flammables. Material or substances can be on the shelf. You don't need to put them in a cabinet, in a flammable cabinet. And there, of course, there are a lot of more restrictions. So you need to check based on your quantities how much you have. If your storage connected to the hospital, or if it's outside. If it's outside the hospital, then you can store more larger quantities, and that is fine. On the shelf, you have to store chemicals on the shelf. Then you should never store any chemicals above eye level. So just in case it spills, try to reach out so it doesn't come in your eyes. So always keep your chemicals stored below eye level. Your corrosives, whether it's acids or alkaline, strong corrosives, should be in the lower shelves, close to the floor. So in case it drops or it falls, it will not break. When you transport corrosives, always have a secondary containment, because they usually come in a glass container. So glass container could easily break. As you're walking, you could hit something or someone can hit you. So you won't have an accident. So have a secondary containment. You'll find in the market there are a lot of like a rubber container that you can put this glass container inside a rubber container. So if even if it breaks, someone hits it, whatever happens, it will contain the acid inside the rubber container. So always during transporting, try to think of that if you're transporting large quantities. Safe handling, of course. How do you know where do you find the information? Your first source of information is the label. The label gives you a lot of information. And by law, no chemicals should leave any factory or any sales place without proper label. So you have the most important information you need is already available in the label. So try to read the label. When you get any new chemical, read the label and go to the safety data sheet. Read the safety data sheet because it's extremely important. Try, even if you don't read the whole safety data sheet, but look at the most important parts. In case of an accident, what happens? How to deal with it? First aid measures. If there's a fire, what to use? Some chemicals, if you add water to it, it will, as I mentioned earlier, it will explode. And some chemicals, if you add water, it will ignite. So it is very important to know what you're dealing with, and have just read more about the chemicals, what it is, what's inside it, what's the properties. Is it flammable? Is it corrosive? Is it does it cause cancer? Does it cause infertility? Does it cause liver failure, and so on? And of course, transporting, as we mentioned. So always make sure that you transport it properly. So close containers, the right container to close. If it's a corrosive, to have a secondary containment. And if it's a flammable, keep it away, store it away from heat source. Bicric acid, as we mentioned earlier, need to do maintenance, have a checklist for that, to add water to it every few months. And if you have silver nitrate, store it in a dark area away from the sun, away from the light. So always read the safety data sheet. It will tell you the storing requirement and make sure that you implement that. And usually, silver nitrate comes in a container that is a brownish color, but it will still might get some sunlight in it. So always cover it. If you have it, cover it with aluminum foil, for example, if your room has enough sunlight. So aluminum foil will prevent the sun, direct sun exposure. So try to follow what's written in the safety data sheet and what's written in the label. It tells you that you need to store in cold temperature in a fridge. So we need to make sure that it is stored between less than 4 Celsius degrees. Most chemicals should be stored at the room temperature, but some chemicals, it will tell you that to store it in an explosion-proof fridge. What does that mean? A lot of people probably think like, oh, I need to get a fridge. Where do I find a fridge that is explosion-proof? Or if I have a room says, okay, use electricity but explosion-proof outlets. So it doesn't mean that it will not explode. That means it will be covered, wherever the light is covered with a seal, so spark will not come out. Same thing with the lights. So this is that's what they mean. They don't mean that the fridge itself is not going to explode, or if there's an explosion inside, it will hold the explosion. So just only it means that it will prevent the spark from coming into that, because these probably have a very high flammability property or very, very low flash point. And this is a common mistake also we see during surveys. If you check the medical gas room, you have a lot of oxidizers, as we mentioned, oxygen, nitrous oxide, and stuff. So these, if you have a small spark, that means you started a fire. And this will make, so if you don't have good ventilation, you need to make sure that your outlets, always make sure the outlets, the plugs or switches are explosion proof. That means they're sealed. They will not allow spark to leave that area or that plug. So HazMat plan, again, so we need to make sure that second part, hazardous material plan, must be available. It must be include at least the following, as we mentioned, the goals, SMART objectives. What do we mean by SMART objective? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And this is another common mistake we see. Whenever we see KPI saying, okay, I'm going to train the staff. Okay, which staff? How many staff you're going to train? And how long? You're going to train them in 1 year, or you're going to train them in 5 years? So make sure that it is realistic. Or sometimes say, I'm going to train all my staff. The hospital has 3,000 employees, and I'm going to train them in 2 months. Okay, there's no way on earth you're going to be able to do that, to train them properly, unless you get all these 2,000 employees in a big auditorium and do the training. So try to make sure that it is realistic. It's something that can be done. You need to make sure that you have inventory of the HazMat, handling of hazardous material, how to handle, how you don't have to go into a lot of details, but enough details, because your policy or your plan is a reference for the new employees. So they have to get to that, how to store, how to transport. السياسة أو البلان لازم يكون موجود في مكان العمل، لازم يكون written زي ما تكلمنا أول، ولازم يكون عندي KPIs مؤشرات أداء عشان أعرف إنه أنا في دائما لازم يكون في تطور، لازم يكون في تحسن. فأنا ممكن أختار مؤشر أداء مثلا هذه السنة إنه أقلل المواد الخطرة أو الويست نفايات الخطرة بنسبة 10% على سبيل المثال، أو أدرب الموظفين اللي يتعاملوا مع المواد الخطرة اللي عندهم مواد خطرة كلهم خلال على الأقل مرة في السنة. فلازم يكون عندي مؤشرات أداء، ولازم مجد يكون في عندي بلان، وشوف هل أنا وصلت أتشيف، حققت الهدف اللي وضعته في بداية السنة أو لا. فهذا شيء مهم جدا. لازم يكون عندي تفاصيل كيف آلية تخزين المواد الخطرة. قلنا المواد الكيميكال كوروسيفز والمواد الخطرة بشكل عام المفروض إني ما أخزنها فوق مستوى العين، لازم أحطها على الأرفف على الليفل أقل من مستوى العين. والمواد الحارقة الكوروسيفز اللي هو الأحماض الأسيدز والألكلاينز والبيسز تكون على الأرفف السفلية بحيث لو طاحت أو ما تنكسر. ايضا اثناء نقل مثلا السلفيريك اسيد او الهيدروكلوريك اسيد، هذه مواد حارقه، لو انقلها من مكان الى مكان اخر انقلها في كونتينر سكندري كونتينر، في كونتينر وعاء اخر يكون من الربر مصنوع من المواد غير قابله للانكسار، لو اصطدم في شيء او انكسر تحتوي المواد القابله للاشتعال او المواد عفوا الحارقه. وطريقة التخزين أيضا قلنا دائما أخزن كميات محدودة في كل مكان، ما تكون عندي كميات كبيرة. أكثر مكان في المستشفى في الكيميكالز عندي المختبر، إذا خصوصا إذا في هيستولوجي أو سيتولوجي، CSST وحدة تعقيم، وحدة غسيل كلى. هذه أكثر 3 أماكن حصل فيها مواد hazardous material أو chemicals بشكل كبير. So we need to make sure إنه إما عندنا غرفة فيها تهوية جيدة جدا، ولازم يكون في ليبل على كل باب فيه، يعني لو أنا عندي هذه الغرفة فيها ستور تخزين للمواد الخطرة، لازم يكون عندي على الباب الرئيسي لهذه الغرفة في ساين إنه هنا في عندي مواد قابلة للاشتعال، في عندي مواد حارقة، في عندي مواد مؤكسدة، في عندي مواد مشعة، أي شيء هذا لازم تكون موجودة على الساين. هذه أوشا ريجوليشنز. الجزء الثاني من زي ما تكلمنا هو الساينز اند سيمبتومز، لازم يكون عندي الاعراض مكتوبه ويتم التدريب عليها الموظفين ويعرفوا ايش هي لو حصل اي اكسبوجر او هذه الاعراض وجدت ايش حيسوي. لازم يطلع من المكان وريبورت، اما اكتيفيت الكود او يتصل على قسم السيفتي، الناس اللي عندهم الانالايزرز ممكن يجي يتاكد انه فعلا هذه المواد خطره. So dizziness or drowsiness, this is one sign. teary eyes هذه الدوخة مثلا أو التدميع في العيون. nausea, vomiting, headaches, and so on. So all of these are signs. Runny nose, sore throat, all of these are signs and symptoms should make you alert if that happened. So and to try to see, for example, we said dizziness and drowsiness. This could happen when you're exposed to carbon dioxide. There's too much carbon dioxide, then there's less oxygen in the air, so it will make you feel dizzy or drowsy. Teary eyes when you have exposure to formaldehyde, metformin, or lizynine, or sulfuric acid. Nausea, when less oxygen, that will make people start to feel nauseated. Some chemicals, the bad part, or what happens, for example, we have the chloroform. Chloroform is that used to be in the past they used to use it for anesthesia. كانت تستخدم للتخدير قديما، ولكن المخاطر فيها عالية جدا، هي من المواد اللي ممكن تسبب الوفيات وتسبب سرطان، مواد مسرطنة أيضا. فهذه المادة الآن ممنوع استخدامها إلا في بعض الكميات قليلة جدا. فهذه المادة لو صار فيها ليك، رائحتها جميلة، رائحتها ما تزعجك، وهذه المصيبة لما تشوف الرائحة ما هي مزعجة، people will ignore it and they pass out and they can die, overdose. So if you have chloroform, it's not allowed to have that anymore, but unless in small quantities. But if you do have it, when there's a leak, the chemical does not smell bad. It smells, actually, it has a very sweet smell. So the smell is nice, and people will, you don't mind it. But in a few minutes, if you don't have good ventilation, you can fall asleep and you'll be unconscious, and people can die because of overdose of that chemical. So you have to be careful. That doesn't mean all bad chemicals that they will have a bad smell. A headache, same thing. The headache can happen when you have low oxygen. That means there's something that's causing that carbon dioxide, or you have liquid nitrogen. This is another high risk we see in hospitals. If you have a derma clinic, they use the liquid nitrogen. You have large quantities, they keep that big beaker in the clinic. So you don't have proper ventilation, it will displace because it is the boiling point of liquid nitrogen is 195 Celsius degrees below zero. So it's boiling at room temperature. You can see, and it's heavier than air, so it will displace oxygen, and that could cause people to have these symptoms. And if they're not careful, they can cause some serious injury. Also, the other risk with liquid nitrogen, because temperature, it can stay in liquid. It's only between 100 minus 195 Celsius degrees to minus 220 Celsius degrees. So it's extremely cold. It's cryogenic. So if it spills in someone's hand or someone's leg, so that's goodbye for that leg. It's just gonna freeze. The cell's gonna die. Then amputation will have to be done for that organ. So it's extremely risky. So you should not store it in large quantities in your derma clinic. It should be stored away, either in medical gas rooms, away from other gases, or in a separate room with a good ventilation, and you can just have a small beaker that would last for maybe one day. So, and it's very important to have the thermal gloves, something that's thick. So when you're filling from the main tank to that small beaker, so in case it spills in your hand, so you have the thermal gloves. So you fill that container, it will be enough to last you for a whole day. And God forbid something happens, a small quantity will not affect, and it's safe. Also, something else that is very important with liquid nitrogen, that it needs to have the container must have a safety valve or pressure relief valve. So usually you see it either comes in two ways. Either the container itself is open because it boils too much. You can see it just boiling and bubbling, and you get closer, you feel very cold. You feel the coldness from that, and you see that white vapor coming out. So this is one way, and that's fine. Or the other way to reduce the loss, what people do, they have now the new technology, not now, it's been in the market for a while, that has a cover, but there is a safety disc or pressure release disc. So if when the pressure reaches certain amount, the, it will cause that disc to open. It release the pressure, then it close again. So this way you don't lose that. Instead of filling that container every 2 days, for example, then it could last you 1 week or more, it depends. So that is very important. And accident happened in the States. They tried to save that. It was a large tank of liquid nitrogen. They closed it so it will not evaporate too fast and cause an explosion. It destroyed it wiped the entire building. It's just the whole building was gone because of that. So be careful of that, and make sure that you do frequent tests of the check. We had an incident, the National Guard. We had the container that had disk, and something happened, maybe because of the humidity, or it was defective container when we received it. It did explode, but the disk by its own, the only disk that flew away. If somebody was close to it, it would probably it could have killed him because it will flew like a bullet. So we have to make sure that your containers are okay and they're checked and properly maintained. So remember again, we go back to the equation. We said accidents equal hazard plus exposure. So the logic that if I need to control the hazard, I need to prevent accidents, what's the first thing I need to do? If I try to see, can I eliminate the hazard? Can I remove the hazard? Do I need that hazard in place or I don't? So if I don't need it, if I can do without it, then eliminate it. I have hydrochloric acid. If I don't need the hydrochloric acid in my place, then I just eliminate, remove it. Then I will remove the accidents. But sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have that choice. So we need that hazardous substance, and it is very important. So in this case, if I cannot eliminate, the exposure, I will try to. If I cannot eliminate the hazard, I will try to control the exposure. So how do these chemicals get into our body? And we'll talk about that exposure in a minute. How do these chemicals get into our bodies? As we mentioned earlier, the inhalation is the most common way of entry because the chemicals, they are in form of gases or form of vapor, and we inhale them through our nose. They get into our lungs. Through the lungs, they go to the bloodstream, and they can get into our heart and our brain, and they can cause some injuries. Then the absorption through the skin, as we mentioned earlier. So the same way is for that applies for bacteria and for the chemicals, except the absorption. So bacteria will not penetrate your skin unless there is a cut on the skin. Sorry. So, but it will. You can inhale it through the inhalation. You can ingest it through when you're eating. You have contamination in your hands. You don't wash your hands. You go to have your lunch and you eat the small parts of this toxic chemical get into your food and you ingest it and people get sick. Or injection. Usually injection, for the most part, it is unintentional. Someone's dealing with chemicals. Somehow he gets a needle prick or and gets into their body. And that happens a lot with the nurses when they're extracting blood from a patient or they're doing something, they have a needle prick. Or the housekeepers. Sometimes the nurse will throw after they use the syringe or the needle, they don't throw it in the sharps container, they throw it in the regular waste container. So the housekeeper comes trying to pick that container and they will have a needle prick. So it depends if that needle has hepatitis B virus or hepatitis C or other illness, they get infected. So it's very important to pay attention. So these are the ways. So without these chemicals getting into our system or these viruses or bacteria getting into our body, we will not get sick. We will not get injured. So they could be around us. They could be everywhere, but if they don't get into our body, we will not be affected. The hazard types. So of course we have the health hazards or we have the physical hazards. So there are two types of hazards that affect us. Health hazards that can affect us, can cause injuries to human or injuries to any living animals and so on. So and there are two types, could be either acute or chronic exposure. And what is the difference between acute and chronic? Acute is immediate effect. So one exposure is enough to cause injuries. Chronic effect, you need multiple exposures with a high dose or above the permissible exposure limit to cause the injuries. Acute, for example, someone, as we mentioned that example earlier, the sulfuric acid, that child who had to spilled sulfuric acid on his leg. So immediately, one exposure is enough to cause severe burns. I've witnessed also seen someone who got, in the market, you can go and buy the chemical for your clogged drain. And these are so powerful. They are so scary. Wallahi, I was so scared when I saw that the material. I bought it, and the guy said, I asked him, is it good? He said, yeah. Unless it's rocks that's clogging your sewage, it will melt it. And the guy was not kidding. When I put that material in the drain, I see the reaction, and it in no time it just melted everything. It was just too scary. A friend of mine, her father was cleaning the drain of the kitchen, and she had they missed him. So they're the three girls sitting in the room. The father was in the kitchen. After maybe half an hour, they realized, well, where's our father? He did not come back. So they went to check on him. He was unconscious. From the smell of that chemical, he fell down. It spilled on his shoulder. And by the time they found him half an hour later, they realized the the flesh on his shoulder was all dissolved. That meat, it was exposed. The bones were exposed. It was so bad. So they, of course, come to the hospital, and he had to have multiple surgeries to reconstruct it to fix that. So these are extremely powerful corrosives chemicals. So you have to be careful when you're dealing with that. So this is an acute that have acute effect. One exposure is enough to cause severe damage. Sulfuric acid, it is available and you can buy it in the market. They are available in the hospitals everywhere, and it's highly corrosive chemical. Not only the chemical itself is corrosive, but also the vapor. Because when you open it, you can smell it. It's a very strong smell. It's a very bad smell. But if you inhale that smell, it could corrode your airway, the breathing airway. It gets into the lungs with the large quantities. It will dissolve, it will corrode the mucous membrane in the lungs that can cause bleeding in the lungs, and people will die. They will drown in their own blood. So it is extremely toxic, extremely hazardous, corrosive chemicals. So you have to be very careful with that chemical if it does happen or if you have to deal with it. So make sure that you deal with it properly. Make sure you know enough about this chemical and how to protect yourself from that. And sometimes chemicals are incompatible. So we use at home the Clorox, which is chlor, and we have the ammonia, which is flash. And many people have these at their home. Sometimes, our mother or our sisters or ourselves, we try to clean the bathroom. It doesn't. We use one chemical. It did not work properly. Then I get another chemical. I'll try to make my own magic formula. I mix Clorox with flash, which is ammonia and chlor. And in both, if you read the label of the chemicals, the ammonia tells you do not mix with the chlor, and the chlor tells you do not mix with ammonia. So they're incompatible chemicals. When you mix them together, you can see the reaction starts. There's a vapor starts to coming out, and it's very bad smell and can kill you if you don't get out. So don't mix chemicals until you are sure. So where do I know? Where do I find that information? I go back to my safety data sheet. Try to read. Can I mix this with that? Is it incompatible? Is it compatible with this or not? Some chemicals, as we mentioned earlier. So when you mix them together, then you will have a very powerful or very toxic chemical or very highly reactive chemicals that can explode. And vice versa. Some chemicals, they could be too toxic. If you mix them together, you will have non-toxic outcome. And it could be the opposite. Two non-hazardous, you mix them together, then you will have a very hazardous or very toxic chemicals. So the acute exposure is one exposure is enough to cause injuries. The chronic effect or chronic exposure, it will take years. For example, the exposure to xylene, exposure to formalin, exposure to toluene. There are many chemicals that can cause cancer in the long term. So you have to be exposed to these chemicals above the permissible exposure limit, the PEL, which is defined by OSHA, for a long period of time. So if that happens, people will either can get cancer, or they can get renal failure, or they can get kidney failure, liver sclerosis, or they can have central nervous system failure. So, and that is very bad. Or sometimes people will have sterility; they will not be able to have children anymore, or they will have mutation in the gene, so they have whenever they have kids, they could be deformed. So there is a large effective chronic effect of this chronic exposure. المواد الخطرة لها نوعين من التعرض. في بعضها يكون في الأكيوت، الإصابات الحادة، اللي ممكن إصابة واحدة تسبب أو تعرض واحد لهذه المادة تسبب إصابة. أو في بعضها التعرض المزمن، الأمراض المزمنة، يتعرض واحد إلى هذه المواد يوم بعد يوم بعد يوم في مجال العمل، وحتسبب بعد فترة زمنية طويلة، سنوات، يصير عنده إما سرطان، أو يصير عنده فشل كلوي، يصير عنده سرطان في الكبد أو في الرئة، أو يصير في شلل بسبب مشاكل تصل إلى نظام السنترال نيرفس سيستم، اللي هو نظام أو النظام التنفسي، نظام الأعصاب. أو الفيزيكال هازاردز عندنا هو الفاير اكسبوجر او كونتامينيشن. ممكن الكيميكال زي ما قلنا الصوديوم لو ميكست مع with water it will explode، حيصير عندي explosion. Potassium, if I mix it with water it will ignite. And contamination, of course, if I have a leak of hazardous material leak, then it will go into the drains and affect our drinking water, or it can affect the ozone layer just from all the carbon monoxide of the cars, the combustion of the diesel and fuel gas. It causes pollution to the air and causes global warming. It's affecting our ozone and affecting our plants. So the acute single exposure, we said through the absorption, it can cause eye irritation, blurring eye, blurred vision. So people will be affected. Okay, I guess we're going a little bit. We gotta go a little bit faster just to make sure we're almost done. And we've covered that. The skin, as we mentioned, rash, dryness, burns, ingestion, nausea, unconsciousness, death. Acute, again, single exposure. Inhalation, we mentioned headaches, dizziness, nausea, vomiting. We mentioned all of that. And chronic effect, throat, lung damage, liver, kidney damage, central nervous system damage. Okay, so exposure limits, as we mentioned earlier, the permissible exposure limit, PEL, that's the amount limit that you're allowed to get for 8 hours. Threshold limit, TLV, that's set by the different entities, but this is what recommended to have through your lifetime. So that exposure, as long as, because it will accumulate. The time weighted average, that's how much you get in 8 hours. You take the average of it, and that's how much you're allowed to get within a working day. And short time exposure limit, STL, that's the maximum exposure you can get within 15 minutes. For example, formalin, it has the permissible exposure limit of 50 parts per million, but the short time exposure limit is 200 parts per million, because only for a short period of time then you make up. The recommended exposure limit is recommendation by NIOSH, and that's what they recommend. That's a lower limit. Please, we covered fire exposure and contamination. Fire, I think we're all familiar. We won't go much in details about fire. Protection and prevention is better than the cure. How can I prevent fires? I have flammable materials. I need to train the staff. I have good housekeeping. Keep flammable materials away from hazardous substances. Proper storage. We mentioned that we all know the fire triangle. That three elements of fire. That if I remove one of the elements, the fire is usually out. So try to work that prevention, trying to keep one of these elements away, or keep away these elements, so I'll never have the good environment for fire. Last point we already covered. Okay, and this is important, the upper and lower limit. So you see this is LEL and UEL, upper exposure limit, or sometimes upper flammable limit and lower flammable limit. That means that chemical can only ignite or explode when it's between these two limits. So when it's less than that, that means it's too little concentration, will not ignite. And if it's higher than that, that means the concentration is too rich, not enough oxygen for it to happen. So these are just only examples. For example, you can see the ones that has a very wide range, the ethylene oxide, that is the most dangerous, or the most hazardous. Compressed gases, we mentioned that in the place, we need proper storage, proper handling, proper transport. Of course, as you can see in this picture, stored without the caps, and here they are not secured, so that's wrong. So this proper storage, proper transport, and proper storage. They should be secured to the wall, and they should always use the right way. Also try to segregate, so keep flammables away from oxidizers, at least 6 meters away. If you can't, keep them in separate holes. So if you have, for example, acetylene, store it away from oxygen or nitrous oxide. They should be stored upright. The area should be well ventilated and secured, cap away from heat source, away from oils and grease, and always flammables away from oxidizers, and safety signages in the doors. When you receive your cylinders, make sure that's not leaking, so it will not cause saturation of the oxygen. Check for built-in amount, that's recommended by SPAHI or mandated by SPAHI. Same thing for medical gas pipes. So we need to check for leak, make sure that you have proper direction, proper signages, and the medical gas pipes, direction and the type of gas, and check for leak by either consumption or by the differential pressure between the manifold and different area far from the manifold. And of course, check the valve. We're going to watch this quick, what is the hazard in this cylinder. Then after that, we'll cover briefly.
When a typical cylinder is filled to its design pressure of 2400 psi, it will contain almost 300 cubic feet of atmospheric pressure gas, or about 160 times the internal volume of the cylinder. This compression of gas represents a tremendous amount of stored energy. If the outlet valve is broken off, the sudden release of compressed gas can turn the cylinder into a missile with energy to shoot through a cinder block wall. In one reported incident, a damaged cylinder penetrated two sheet metal walls before becoming airborne and exiting through the roof. The tank reached an altitude of 140 feet before falling back through the building's roof a second time. When a steel cylinder becomes a projectile, it can move with great force, at high speeds, and in unpredictable directions, with the potential to cause serious or fatal injuries.
I think that's self-explanatory. We don't have to explain that. That is the risk of cylinders. That's why they have to be chained, and we need to have the cap on at all times. And we covered that. Okay, we covered the labels. Okay, the safety data sheet. So there are 16. Sorry, the GHS. Okay, the GHS label that it has usually the through three different parts. The elements, the product identifier, the name of that chemical, the symbols or the pictogram. There are 9 different types of pictogram, signal word, and hazard statement, and the precautionary statement. And we can see an example. So these are the first one is an oxidizer. That's a flammable, explosive. That's poisonous or toxic or highly toxic. This is corrosive, compressed gas cylinders. This is health hazard that could be can cause cancer, can cause central nervous system, can cause other illness, and this is harmful to the environment. And this is irritant, or there are other health hazards that they are not aware of. Signal word is shows the severity of the muscle. They could be either saying warning or danger. So warning that has less hazard, danger has more hazard. Hazard statement describes the nature of the hazard, the chemical. For example, tell you that physical hazards, health hazards, environmental, so causing eye damage, for example, or toxic if inhaled. Precautionary statement measures to prevent and minimize adverse effects. So it will try to tell you what to do to prevent the injuries. So keep away from heat, do not eat, do not drink or smoke while using this product. And this is an example of GHS has label for methanol. So you can see the name of the chemical, methanol, that tells you danger. That's then you see the pictograms. It's toxic, it's flammable, and health hazard. And the name of the company with the address, phone number. I'll tell you what to do. Okay, the NFPA. I guess we're gonna skip the NFPA just because of time's sake. I'm sorry, because we're talking two different languages, is a bit delayed, and we're gonna go to the safety data sheets and then go through that. And when you need a hazardous safety data sheet is when you have hazardous, any chemical is have either health hazard or physical hazards. Handling a hazmat spill, you need to have a spill kit, of course. You can make your own spill kit. You don't have to buy it ready, or if you buy it ready, it's fine. So what's inside? You need to have a dust pen and a broom in case there are the glass pieces broken or a forceps. You need to have acid gloves, a bag, and you need to have labels to label it, and of course a goggles, safety, shoe cover if you have that would be great, and absorbent. When there is a spill, the first thing to do is not to panic. So when you panic, you run into walls, you run into problems, you don't know what to do. So stay calm, alert people, and never clean a spill alone. Always have someone else assisting you with a spill, keeping an eye. So, and that's if you have a spill. How do I decide whether it's a small spill or a large spill? It's usually need to do a quick risk assessment based on the hazard. If it's highly flammable and I don't have ignition source, then it's not a big deal. But if it's highly toxic, even if it's a small quantities, it will be considered as a large spill. So I need to have proper PPEs and I need to activate the code. And how do I handle the spill? I need to cover around the spill, prevent it from spreading. If the container is still spinning, I will try to stop it. But the first thing I need to do is wear my PPEs, make sure that I have the right PPEs, then try slowly cover that whole area, let it absorb all the material, then scoop it, put it in a plastic bag, biohazard bag, label it with the name of the chemical or chemicals that they were spilled. And if you use any spill kit, mark the spill kit, the name of a spill kit that you use, because that's additional chemicals. Then you can send it as hazardous waste. Contaminated victim, if you have someone who's contaminated, before you bring him to the ER, he should be decontaminated outside so you don't contaminate the ER. Hazardous waste, we covered that, just already the same. The hazard control, as we mentioned earlier, the hazard, I can try to prevent the hazard. If I cannot eliminate the hazard, then I will eliminate the exposure. And we all know the hierarchy of control: elimination, substitution, or reduce, engineering control, administrative control, and PPEs. So if you cannot eliminate or reduce, try to use the proper ventilation, administrative control, policies, procedures, training, and PPEs, of course. Okay, radiation, we'll spend probably 10 more minutes, then we will be done. Okay, so radiation, we have three types of radiation. We have the radiation, the X-ray from machines that we have in our hospital, X-ray machines, fluoroscopy. We have from CT. We have radioactive materials. So how do people get affected? Why do they need to wear their PPEs? Or they're not allowed to stand next to the machine? Because we have scattered radiation. Sometimes heat, or when it hits the person, it will just scatter all over the place and hits the people. So how do I protect people from radiation? There are three factors for protection, which is time and distance and so this is something new that came up, that you need to justify or optimize why you need to request an X-ray, for example. Not only the insurance, sometimes we think just insurance doesn't want to pay, but sometimes that is one reason. But the other reason is we as humans sometimes ask for a second opinion. You get an X-ray, you go to another hospital, you get another X-ray, you go to a third hospital, you get another X-ray. So all these X-rays affecting your body, it's built up and it will accumulate in your body. So that's what they mean by justification and optimize. So if I've done an X-ray, I can take the report and they should accept that, because I don't want to have the X-ray because it will affect my genes, will have a huge effect on my body. It will accumulate in my bloodstream. And the alarm, that means as low as reasonably achievable. So try to keep the patient or any person exposed as little as possible to radiation. So the radiation protection principles is the time, distance, and shielding, as we mentioned earlier. So the shorter the time, the less exposure that I have. So if one person is exposed for an X amount of time, he will get an X amount of dose of radiation. If he's exposed to 2X, he's going to get 2X dose. So double exposure, double the time. So 3 minutes exposure will give you a certain dose. So if you expose to 6 minutes, it's going to give you double that dose. The distance works a bit differently. So if the further away you are from the source, the safer you are. So if you are 1x away from the source, then it's 1 over x squared time. So if you're 2 meters away from the source, so you'll be 1 over 4, 1 quarter dose. 3 meters away or 3x, you're 1 over 9 the dose. So you reduce the dose tremendously. 4 meters, 1 over 16 of the dose. So distance is a great way to keep from getting exposure. And of course, the shielding. Shielding, which is material used between the source and the person. So it could be the PPEs, the lead aprons, the gonad, the thyroid shields, or even the room itself when you do the shielding of that room. So lead, water, or concrete can be a good base on the source of radiation. Lead works for X-ray, and water works for neutrons and radioactive materials, and concrete. Protective clothing protect against radiation hazards and keeps radioactive materials off your skin and your clothes. So whenever you're dealing with radioactive materials, you need to make sure that you have your PPEs. The difference between radioactive materials, we're going to see them here. These alpha, beta, gamma, and neutron. So the alpha, beta, and these are particles. That they are continuous source of radiation. And so whenever you have the radioactive materials, at all times it's producing radiation, because that particles, the alpha or beta, they are because of decaying, they're coming from the nucleus of that atom, and it will be affecting people. The alpha can travel only about 0.4 meters or 40 centimeters at a maximum, because it's a very large particle, and it will not penetrate through the skin. So your skin will stop it, or a piece of paper will stop it. The beta is a little bit more. It's a smaller. It's much faster, and it goes up to maybe 40 meters, 10 times. So 4 meters, 10 times the dose, and plastic will stop it, but paper will not stop it. It will penetrate human tissue. It can penetrate through a person. They can alter the genes. They can cause cancer. They can cause a lot of other illnesses, but you can't stop it with the plastic. Gamma and X-rays, they will penetrate through paper. They penetrate through plastic. They penetrate through human bodies, and they can be stopped by lead. So you need to depends on the strength of the machine and the distance from the wall, that will decide how much lead I need to use the wall to have the shielding to protect that room from radiation going outside that room. Then the neutrons, they will penetrate through paper, plastic, lead, human bodies, and they can be stopped by large amount of water if there's a big layer of water, because anything with a high hydrogen will affect, or concrete. They usually use the concrete walls to stop the neutrons. So having proper PPM, the shielding the room, that's to make sure people are not affected. If the machines here, need to make sure that I'll check these areas, the doors, the outside, all these areas, and I'll check for leak annually. I need to make sure that there's still no penetration into that from these areas. I need to do proper PPM to the equipment to prevent the scattered radiation. And watch this last video, and this is the last part of our presentation. So let's watch the video.
If a radiation emergency happens in your area, you can protect yourself, your loved ones, and your pets. No matter where you are, the safest action to take immediately after a radiation emergency is to get inside, stay inside, and stay tuned. If you are outside or in a car, bus, or other vehicle, get inside a building right away. Cars do not provide good protection from radiation outside. If you have pets, bring them inside with you if you can. Radioactive material settles on the outside of buildings like dust or mud, so the best thing to do is stay either in the basement or as far away from the walls and roof as you can. Close and lock all doors, windows, and fireplace dampers, and turn off fans, air conditioners, and forced air heating units that bring air in from the outside. Once you are inside, stay tuned for updated instructions. Television, radio, and social media may be used to share more information. Remember, immediately after a radiation emergency, the safest action for yourself, your loved ones, and your pets is to get inside, and stay tuned.
Thank you very much. شكرا، واعتذر على الإطالة. جزاكم الله خير، واتمنى انه ما كانت مملة وكان فيها فائدة.
الله يعطيك الف عافية استاذ جمال. يعني حقيقة كانت المحاضرة مليئة بالمعلومات الجميلة والقيمة، واللي انا متأكد انه الجميع استفاد منها. نكرر اعتذارنا مرة أخرى لجميع الأشخاص اللي كانوا يرغبون بالحضور، ولكن بسبب الخلل الفني لم نتمكن من يعني السماح لهم بالدخول داخل المحاضرة. المحاضرة هذه مسجلة، كل الناس اللي حضروا معنا راح تصدر لهم بإذن الله شهادات من الجمعية. بالنسبة للآخرين هناك محاضرة، هناك تسجيل لهذه المحاضرة، وراح يكون في تراكينج إن شاء الله عليها، بحيث الشخص اللي يحضرها كمان باليوتيوب كاملة يستحق الشهادة. شكرا جميعا. ما قصرت والله أستاذ جمال على المحاضرة القيمة، وأنا متأكد كثير من الناس يعني يسعى لها، ويعني تمكنا الحمد لله بفضل الله من توفيرها بشكل يعني مجاني للجميع لنشر العلم. فشكرا جزيلا لك ولكل الحاضرين، وبإذن الله أن يعني نتمكن من تقديم المزيد في المحاضرات القادمة بإذن الله. شكرا لكم.
حياكم الله، يعطيكم العافيه جميعا، شكرا.